Welcome to Season 2 of the WAN Manager Podcast. I am your host, Bryan, and we are here to discuss everything WAN, whether it's from the vendor perspective, the end user perspective, the carrier perspective, and of course, analysts, my colleagues at TeleGeography, taking a dive on some data that we have collected that is relevant to all of those different roles within the WAN marketplace. So we started this podcast last year in the midst of lockdowns as a way to connect in ways that we could not because we were missing out on conferences and the like. But we had fun, so I think we're going to keep going for a season 2 here. Hopefully we do get to see some of you that are listening at a conference, maybe a WAN summit later on this year in 2021. So the first episode here in season 2 is going to be with Amir Zmora from flexiWAN, who really have a unique approach to SD-WAN that we're going to get to in just a couple of minutes that I think is worth considering, simply because, if for no other reason, that it is a new approach to a space that is, getting fairly crowded out there. So with that in mind, I like to start out all of these episodes with just a few data points. But I thought first I'd start with just saying that we have in our SD-WAN research service, which is currently being updated. So I'm referring to fairly old data here, but we profile over 70 SD-WAN providers. So just to keep that in mind, that it is indeed a somewhat crowded space. I think I mentioned that during the interview, but we do have over 70 providers in our database. That did go down slightly in 2020. There were some notable mergers and acquisitions. You had CloudGenix get acquired by Palo Alto Networks, Martello Technologies from Adaptive Networks, HPE picked up Silver Peak, and Juniper picked up 128 Technologies. That follows some trends from previous years like Viptela, Cisco, VeloCloud, VMware, of kind of larger equipment vendors or SIs picking up some of these startup SD-WAN companies. So I think we're going to see more of that in 2021. It's going to be less than 70 not too long from now. But also I want to think about how the end users have been acquiring SD-WAN. We're also currently analyzing new data from our WAN manager survey. So this is a little new. It'll be out probably early Q2 of this year. But so far we see about 2 in 5 of our respondents have already adopted SD-WAN. Another 1 in 3 are in the process of rolling it out. So something like a majority of the market, or at least the slice of the market that we talk to, maybe it's a little bit more forward thinking or on the bleeding edge than the larger market, but a good chunk of the market is going to have some kind of SD-WAN installed. But then there's still a lot of folks out there that need to select a provider and need to think about, even if you already have selected a provider, how SD-WAN is integrating with other features like security, monitoring, etc. Then just the other thing I'll mention really quick, Amir and I in the interview do get into a little bit of talk about their pricing model. And I thought I would just review how we cover pricing in our SD-WAN research service. We cover it very much like the telcos do with, your MPLS or DAA kind of service, and NRC, non-recurring charge, MRC. The NRC covering, just the upfront costs of the appliance or the software connecting to a controller, and then the MRC, that ongoing charge for software. And the key core thing is the total encrypted bandwidth throughput at that office. So you have 50 megs of DIA, 50 megs of MPLS at that site, then you have 100 megs of SD-WAN, and that's how you get charged for your SD-WAN service. At that maybe typical size, 100 megs, the median price is pretty low, maybe compared to some telecom services, $125 a month, Gig E, $362 a month. The NRCs are maybe kind of higher, $1,000 a month $1,000 period, not a month, for your 100 meg, 2,500 for your Gig E. But just to throw that out there as a thing to have in the back of your mind of what that model looks like and kind of what general pricing levels we're talking about, then certainly you can have charges added on for advanced features, firewalls, monitoring, that sort of thing. But that's the core way that vendors are presenting it to the market. Okay, so with that, let's get on to hear about the open source model from flexiWAN. Okay, with that introduction, I'd like to say welcome, Amir. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we're going to take obviously a deep dive into what is flexiWAN throughout this entire episode. But I thought maybe first it would be useful just to get your background, sort of where you come from in the telecom industry, how you ended up starting flexiWAN.
Sure, thank you. So actually, my background is coming from voice over IP. After finishing my days of doing development R&D, I started working for Radvision, which in the days that it was still a startup before IPO, and stayed there for many years, eventually being VP products for the technology business unit there, going through the acquisition by Avaya, and then I left the company after like a year and a half. Started another startup that was doing technology for large-scale video broadcasting in the browser using WebRTC technology, which was later acquired by a company from New York with 40 million consumer users. Technology is working still very well there. And that was a bootstrap. So I did consultancy as well to make a living. And through that, I got into SD-WAN at the early days of SD-WAN, and it gave me a great opportunity to speak with many service providers, big and medium size. And the comment I heard from all of them was actually the reason for starting flexiWAN. The comment was basically, we simply resell a vendor. We have no way to differentiate. And I'll be happy to explain more about that later. But that got me thinking, how can we make this different? How can we do something different there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in a way, you're one of the folks in the industry that we might call serial entrepreneurs, always kind of trying to find what new thing can be done. But I will admit, right? So whenever I hear nowadays about a new entrant to the SD-WAN market, there's we profile, I don't know, 70 some odd SD-WAN providers. Depends on what you mean by SD-WAN, how many are actually out there. But it's not an uncrowded market. I think everyone would agree to that. And that's one reason I really wanted to get you on and talk about this is to understand sort of why you entered that market and how flexiWAN is different. I mean, we have open source. There's a lot of SD-WAN providers that have an open platform, if you will, working on a white box or x86. But I thought it'd be interesting to start there with what is open source SD-WAN and how is that different from everything that we see out there that you were responding to based on these customer interactions.
Yeah. So first, I will say that fully agree. Today, there are something between 60 to 70 SD-WAN, let's call them vendors or providers, whatever, where they see themselves as such. And when we started flexiWAN, there were probably around 50. So it doesn't really matter. It was a crowded market already then. So I said, there's no point getting into this market unless we can do something that is significantly different. So we try to do everything different. I'll get to that in just a second.
Sure.
So when we talk about open platforms, and you mentioned running on x86 white box. So this, from my point of view, is not yet open because so they don't dictate which hardware device to use, but still the solutions that are being provided today by all of the SD-WAN vendors are using some open source elements inside them, but at the end of the day, they're providing a closed product, meaning it's closed source, and more, it's closed from technology perspective. Okay, and I'll say a bit more about this. If you look at the SD-WAN solutions that they offer, what they try to do is to lock you in for a single vendor type of solution where they bundle as many technologies and capabilities into one very big software box. Things like DPI, WAN optimization, stuff like that. Okay.
And you mean one SD-WAN vendor, regardless of whether you're getting it from a vendor or managed service provider carrier, just one solution stacked basically
Well,
together.
I'm first of all referring to the vendor solution itself that then
Mm-hmm.
is being used by the service provider. And if you look at what the service
Right.
providers do, the strategy of many of them is to simply resell multiple vendors. Okay,
Right.
because they
Right.
don't have any way to differentiate. So you look at the big
Mm-hmm.
service providers, even medium size, they have more than one SD-WAN vendor on their network, which sounds very strange. Okay,
Right.
it's not
Right.
because of
Right.
a second source, by the way. It's not because of a second source. It's because of trying to answer as many enterprise needs as possible. So if you go
Right. So if your customer has, they give you the profile of their network, the profile of the features that they want, rather than give them different features, you give them a different vendor. Is that sort of?
exactly, and then what happens if
Mhm.
the requirements change? What do? You change the vendor? That's not so easy to do.
Right.
Okay,
Right. Right.
yeah. So,
Mm-hmm.
so, so what I'm saying here is when you look at this big software box, it has capabilities, as I mentioned, like DPI, WAN optimization, and stuff like that. But why or who said that you as an enterprise, or even let's say as a service provider, need to get all of these technologies from one single vendor instead of being able to select by yourself which elements you even want, because sometimes you don't need all of these features. And
Mm-hmm.
if you decided that you want a specific capability, from which vendor you're going to take it? Why is it dictated by the vendor that many times actually sublicenses? And by the way, I believe that all of them, or including the very very big ones, without saying names, have
Sure.
some elements that are sublicensed. So why did
Mm-hmm.
they
Mm-hmm.
decide for the service provider which, let's say, for example, DPI engine should run inside? Or should there be DPI at all or not? Because DPI takes a lot of resources, hardware, and
Mm-hmm.
also costs money. So that's a problem that I can talk a bit later afterwards how we solve it, but that's a problem
Mm-hmm.
that the service providers have. And once on a panel in a conference, we had several service providers, some of them tier ones, and the question was that I asked them as a moderator, uh, how do you as a service provider differentiate an SD-WAN? And all of them talked about things like 24 by 7 support, bundling
Mm-hmm.
of services like connectivity together with SD-WAN, stuff like that. So I asked, but how do you differentiate in the SD-WAN itself? And they all said, well, this we cannot do.
Right, because they're giving a certain set of features, and they have selected certain partners. So actually, let's get to that part maybe, which is that if you're saying, okay, you gave the example of DPI. I'm an end user maybe, and I have this particular software vendor in mind for my DPI service. Can they use flexiWAN and bring any kind of alternative sort of software in that they like, or are you still locked in with certain vendors or partners in that sense?
Okay, so for that, I need to, in a few words, explain the unique part of what we do. So first of all,
Yeah.
flexiWAN, I always say we disrupt and democratize the SD-WAN market, and we do that
Mm-hmm.
with what we call the three world firsts of flexiWAN. So first of all, we're the first and only open source SD-WAN. Second, and meaning a complete SD-WAN solution, you can go take the open source, compile it, and use it under the
Mm-hmm.
license of the
Mm-hmm.
open source. There are
Right.
only two elements that we don't have as open source. One is our billing engine, which is used in our SaaS model service. And second is the UI layer only. But you can use the REST APIs of the management to build your UI. So the
Mm-hmm.
second part, the second first is we are the first and only application store for networking and SD-WAN. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
talk about them in just a minute. That's the
Mm-hmm.
differentiation that allows you to bring more technologies in. And the
Mm-hmm.
third one is that we are the first SaaS business model company. And if you want to talk about pricing, no problem to touch that later.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So now, what exactly relating to your question? What we do
Mm-hmm.
is we slice SD-WAN to horizontal layers. We have the networking infrastructure, which is I always call the base layer, which are those
Mm-hmm.
IPsec tunnels that connect between sites, connect them to the cloud, centrally managed with all the routing protocols, zero-touch provisioning, and many, many things. It's a big layer. We started working on it on the beginning of the company in 2018. We're still working on it today, and we'll continue working on it for the next few years. There will be always
And
be things that
including a
need to
lot of
happen.
those things that are
Yeah, never.
core SD-WAN technologies, right? So that like
Yeah,
the sine qua non of SD-WAN, if you will. Yeah.
yeah. That's the infrastructure. But on top of that,
Mm-hmm.
we have what we call the application framework. And this is what allows
Mm-hmm.
you through an SDK to dynamically load applications that run in the data flow of the router or in the management. Okay, so this means that you can, if you want to visualize to yourself the enterprise requirements, okay, they can be like a line that you draw between two extreme requirements. One is the
Mm-hmm.
simplified option of just the infrastructure, networking, connectivity, okay, the tunnels between the
Just
sites, management.
IPsec, right?
Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
it.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. IPsec, centrally managed. All the way to the full featured solution with all of the all the bells and whistles of SD-WAN. If you put together everything from all the vendors, okay. The
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
reality is never at these extreme cases. It's always
Mm-hmm.
somewhere in between, but it's never at the same place. It's never one size fits all. And you can even think of a retail inside the enterprise, they would have different requirements for a store versus a large office. So, how do you support it with a single vendor while being cost
Mm.
effective?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So not just for that customer's need, but even sort of on a an office by office scale for within that customer's network, what the
Yeah,
different needs are.
you might have different needs. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the architecture, the very high level architecture of our solution. And then this means that we, flexiWAN, are adding capabilities as applications that you can take in or leave them out. But
Mm-hmm.
you, let's say, as a service provider that has R&D capabilities, or maybe as a big enterprise, or just as a company, a software vendor that has expertise in WAN optimization, as an example, or in monitoring, whatever you want, okay, or DPI for your question, you
Mm-hmm.
would build or integrate your solution as an application that would be dynamically loaded through our application store. And
Mm-hmm.
this means that we are not limiting who would run on our system, but on the other hand, we do have the requirement of testing things. Okay, so we would not
Mm-hmm.
want
Right.
anybody to
Right.
put
Sure.
any
Mm-hmm.
application and then things would
Yeah.
just break.
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
so it's not open in the sense that anybody who wants, there's a complete mess, anybody can put an application, anybody can take it. No, we want
Mm-hmm.
everything to be tested. Today, we're still in the state that we need to actually do the final integration of the application into the system, but that will change probably in 2021, and we will enable others to do it through the SDK. But if you would want to use it on our SaaS system, we would want to first of all test that it works with our system.
Of course. Right. So by way of analogy, on my smartphone, I have the option of downloading Dropbox or Google Drive or Microsoft OneDrive or whatever. But of course, their developers have to work with the Apple Store and make sure that everything functions properly and all that. Does that work as an
That
analogy?
Yes, the only difference is that one, the amount of applications will be significantly less. And
Of
that's
course. Of
one.
course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
second, the level of testing that is required here is higher
Much higher.
because
Right.
because you
Mm-hmm.
don't have the sandbox that you can have, at least on an iOS device. In Android, it's a bit less than that, but you don't have the
Mm-hmm.
sandbox thing that you have in that operating system. So because there is relationship between applications, so we would want to test much more thoroughly, but the amount of applications is significantly less. So it's still possible technically.
hmm And so, I think you've touched on this, but just to be really clear for everybody in the audience of different technical levels and all that sort of thing, and I should say I'm a market guy more than a technical guy, but how does this really differ in that sense from you have your full featured SD-WAN service, but they give you the option of using various VNFs. sort of what's different about that here?
Okay, good. So actually, maybe I should have mentioned that before, because I mentioned the fact that you can run these applications, or not you can, these applications run in the data flow of the router as part of the forwarding graph. And that's very different from a VNF. In the case of a VNF, and we support that option as well, we actually have integrations with several companies that do control and management of VNFs, like INEA, ADVA, RAD. But in that case, what you have is an independent, let's say, representation of the operating system. Okay, each one of these VNFs is a VM with the operating system. It's a full stack. Okay, so it's great for some cases, not for everything. There are some applications that you would prefer for efficiency to run inside the data flow, because if it's touching, let's say, as an example, packet by packet, you don't want the traffic to go out of the VNF and coming back in. That's one thing. And second thing, sometimes you want just some additional functionality, not a full, very, very big application, but some networking capabilities, and you still want to run bare metal. Okay. With this capability, you can remain in the bare metal level, but still have the dynamic capabilities and less overhead and simplicity. Okay. So we support both options. Actually, we have deployments also in the VNF architecture. And the reality is that every company and every service provider has different requirements. It's never a single solution that takes the market by storm. And so this is great for some of the cases, and we can talk further about go to market and the strategy that we have from a customer segment perspective, and I can touch that all over there.
Yeah, well, let's do that now, because I think that's sort of where I was going with looking at if I'm a service provider, sort of why do I want to do this? What's your go-to-market strategy? And we'll couch this in there. Maybe you can hit this later on. But what about direct to enterprise, the end users? How is all of this sort of being presented to the market?
Okay, so to start off, I would say that we are an open source company that uses the technology that we have built in order to provide a SaaS service. So our management is being hosted by us on AWS. Actually, we offer three options to the customer. One, a customer can come to our website, and we're unique in the fact that you can see our pricing on the website. There is actually a pricing page, unheard of in the networking space.
Yes,
you actually have the real pricing, not just contact us for pricing.
Yeah, I should say that. And that's always scary to us at TeleGeography, because we track pricing, but I don't think you'll fit neatly into our model. I mean, most of the SD-WAN vendors we see out there have your install charge, your monthly charge based on your encrypted throughput, maybe some upcharges based on your level of management, but your model sounds very significantly different than that.
So if we'll have time, I'll be happy to touch that as well, and what was our reasoning for what the way we price it, because it's not by chance. So you go to our pricing page and you click a button to open a free account, and then you are opening an account on what we call our shared environment. So you're there together with many other companies on a multi-tenant, completely isolated network of your own. And you can have up to 3 software or FlexiEdge, what we call them, instances for free that you install on a VM or on a physical box that you have. And then you can kick the tires, play around with the system, do a POC, or we have some very small companies who have only 3 sites and they're using us for free. Okay. And you want more.
So you can kick off your proof of concept just on your own, going to the website, or if you're really small, you can just use this as kind of freemium kind of stuff. Okay, gotcha.
We have some that started with the free, because you started with 3 sites and then increased. But we have more than 1,500 accounts already on our SaaS system. That's incredible. That's something we achieved. So that's the first option. The second option is a dedicated environment. In this case, what we do, we spin up a complete isolated white label environment for the customer on AWS. And our account, we take care of all the hosting. It's many, many servers, 2 clusters of databases and everything, but they can manage in a much better way things like the software upgrade timing and a lot of decisions that they can make and put their branding there, of course. And then we have the third option of self-hosting, which of course means that they install by themselves. In the first two ones I've just finished there, it's a pay as you go. You do not commit. You can stop at any time.
Right. Very different. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. This episode of the WAN Manager podcast is brought to you by TeleGeography's free SD-WAN vendor guide. So if you've searched for an SD-WAN vendor, and I know many of you listening to this have or will be soon or should be already, you know that it takes a crazy amount of research, and that is where we come in. So we extracted vendor profiles from our very thorough SD-WAN research service, and we turned them into this handy free guide. We threw in additional insights on SD-WAN trends as well. So it's really a one-stop shop for all things SD-WAN vendor info. You can download the PDF, search the listings, and bone up on your SD-WAN trends. Super easy. All you have to do is click the link in our show notes to get your copy. Yeah, just a quick follow up on that. Just if you're doing all of this through AWS, so you don't need like a sort of controller environment out there in the world. So from a geography perspective, we love to talk about that at TeleGeography. A customer is going to be interacting with you anywhere where they can get to AWS, who of course has cloud regions and on ramps all over the world, so that you're unlimited geographically, I assume then.
Yeah, it's and at the end of the day, it's the management system. The traffic does not go through the management. You do have the option to install the edge device on AWS. We support that. We have some customers who have done that. Or in your own private cloud, you can install FlexiEdge. But that's, of course, something that you would host by yourself as the customer and take care of the bandwidth if you decided to put it there. Okay, but you can put it in any cloud that you want, the edge device. Yeah. So that's about that. And you asked about the segments and what does a service provider do with it? So one of the pain points that the service providers have is how to service the long tail of the market. You see SD-WAN going to a lot of multinational big companies, and you see all kind of PRs, large deployments of very, very big companies. But the gap that many service providers told us about is how do they serve a small company with only 5, 6, 7 sites? How do they serve them? And for that, they need that a deployment will not be a project. It needs to be a cookie cutter from the positive point of view of it, that you can onboard a customer very easily. The service provider wants to have a solution that is their solution, in their control. They want to build all the automation of the onboarding by themselves. They want to add technology by themselves, and they want to build something, a service that from pricing perspective will be adequate for the SMB market or for the retail, by the way. Okay. And for that, they need a lot of control of what services are being offered. They don't want a huge box with all these capabilities that require an 8-core, hardware device. They want something nimble, 2 cores. 2 cores, 4 gig memory. Okay, something like that will be really lean and mean and enable them to be at a low price point for the customer.
So if I can use another analogy, this might be like you have your jar of marbles, and the marbles are the Fortune 1000 kind of companies, and you might be the pouring the sand in to fill up all the other space inside that jar of marbles to allow the service providers to do that, if that makes sense.
Yes, although as time goes by and we're adding more and more capabilities, we see the solution. We have examples actually of very big deployments that are
it can scale up as well.
That are actually moving very soon into production with hundreds of sites. But if I would look at what the service provider is looking for, in the indirect sales model through the large service providers. And there is a public one that you can see a PR that they have done with Telefonica. Okay, they actually say there in the PR that they have a focus on the SMB market, and that's something
Mm-hmm.
that we hear from many service providers. That's a gap. This sand that they want to fill in the jar. That's exactly the gap.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it. That makes sense. Yeah. So you mentioned Telefonica. I don't know how much you can discuss this. Of course, maybe not by name or anything like that. But are you working toward sort of other similar, partnerships with service providers? You looking at managed service providers, maybe even systems integrators? Just give us a feel for how you see things developing over the coming months, if that makes
Okay.
sense.
So the strategy that we have, and we've built a product for that, is mid-size MSPs. That's a strategy that we have, and a large majority of those 1,500 accounts that I mentioned on our SaaS system are such
Mm-hmm.
companies. Even if they don't call themselves MSPs, they still offer services to their
Right.
customers,
Right.
IT services and networking and connectivity and business applications and stuff like that. So we see them as managed service providers. That's a strategic path that we have. And for that, the onboarding needs to be very easy and so forth. It happened to be that several very big service providers have reached out to us. And, it always starts with somebody opening an account from a very big service provider without even
Right.
speaking with us.
You notice that
Yeah,
quickly, right?
we notice
Yeah.
that we're
Yeah.
getting, we're getting 5 to 8 new accounts a day on our SaaS system,
Wow.
and between 10 to
Hmm.
20 leads a day. Okay, it's crazy. uh,
Yeah.
so they open an account, they start playing around, and then we start talking. And from there, it's usually a very long process with these companies. So,
Of course.
from
Yeah.
time to revenue perspective, we see the MSPs usually as typically being able to move faster from POC to production.
So I want to circle back to something that is, I think it's going to have come up in a sense already, but just so that we can be really explicit about it, I want to talk about security, just because that is the hot topic now in terms of everyone's
Yeah.
traditional SD-WAN stack of everything. Most of the SD-WAN providers out there have selected a particular partner, like Fortinet or Palo Alto or whatever the case may be. For I'm going to avoid using the Gartner term, since even if we're small, we're sort of a competitor of Gartner. But your secure edge, if you will, technology, right? How are you thinking of that within the flexiWAN world and integrating security into a solution in a way that's different than someone who has selected Fortinet or Palo Alto as a partner inside their curated stack?
Yeah, so our security strategy actually comprises 3 pillars, I would say. First one is adding capabilities natively into the system.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you right off, it's not that we're looking to add tomorrow morning a full featured firewall into the system, but there are some security elements that customers are asking us to add natively into the system. And these are things that will be released very soon. That's
Okay.
the first thing.
Okay.
That's the first
Mm-hmm.
pillar. The second
Mm-hmm.
pillar that we have already implemented is through VNF integration. So that's similar to what you
Right.
mentioned before. The strategy of some of the SD-WAN companies, they say, okay, we have a VNF of SD-WAN, a VNF of this and that firewall. Great. You have some kind of a manager on top, like the names I mentioned before, and,
Mm-hmm.
and like INEA and others. And great, you have something that can manage these 2 VNFs to work in a service chain architecture. So that's something that we actually have such deployments. And the third pillar is through partnerships. And in this case, we can there are various security companies, very big and very small, that are in
Mm-hmm.
various stages of discussions and work with us, in which we can actually send the traffic to them and utilize, on one hand, a firewall in the cloud, and on the other hand, allow for the enterprise not to send everything to the cloud. I think
Right.
that one of the, when you look at the end of the day, SD-WAN, and also the term that you didn't want to mention before, so I will not
Yeah,
mention
that's
it. The term that we all know, they are terms, okay? They're not
right. Right.
technology. And although you mentioned Gartner before, they do have some
Hmm.
definition for it. When you look at the actual
Sure.
deployments of this, it's never the same one. Every company
Right.
take these
Right.
terms. I call them, they are Swiss Army knives, okay? So
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
company takes them to the direction they like. And I think actually that it's better to have it like that. I'm against standardizing a product or a
Well,
service.
that fits your model very well, right? It's kind of like zero trust. Zero trust isn't a technology; it's a bunch of different strategies that one might use, right? So
Yeah.
it's
So
yeah.
there are companies have different requirements, and but in a general sense, I think that when you bundle everything together, you create a vendor lock-in. So
Hmm.
in that
Hmm.
term that you mentioned for security plus SD-WAN, we see some of the solutions that they prided for. You have only one vendor to do everything. That's also a disadvantage that you have a single vendor that you need to take. You don't have the flexibility. You must take from
Right.
that vendor the SD-WAN, the security, the connectivity, okay? And everything runs through the cloud. So it might fit some cases. It for sure will not fit everything. So, and that's a vendor lock-in, which I view as a problem, and it's a big problem for the service providers and also for the enterprises. So, uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm not saying that it's not a good solution. It is a good solution for some cases.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
using a technology like flexiWAN can allow you to add applications of security into the SD-WAN solution and have the security elements that you need and not necessarily what somebody else dictated for you.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, problem I run into all the time when talking to WAN managers is they say, "Well, we had implemented this SD-WAN service or this security posture, and then our company bought another company in the industry, and now I have one quarter of my network that has this
Yeah.
service, this strategy, and it's completely inoperable with the rest of my network, and trying to solve that problem." So it sounds like your solution would make that a lot more seamless in terms of integrating
Yeah.
whole new segments of network.
Yeah, I want to come back to what I said before because maybe it wasn't clear enough. I talked about the
Hmm.
three pillars for security. So the first one I mentioned about
Right.
us actually adding some capabilities. To expand this a little bit, this can be through
Hmm.
this can also include third-party elements that are running as applications. So
Mm.
it's not necessarily
Right.
a technology that comes from us. It can be from someone else, although there are some elements that we're adding ourselves. And it's a general strategy that we have. Also for DPI, for example, we have some level of application recognition that is part of the product itself. It's not DPI based.
Right.
And if somebody
Right.
prefers to have DPI, that can be added as an application, but we don't dictate that you would use DPI.
I see. Hmm. So we touched earlier on pricing. I don't know if and you suggested you might have sort of more to add there, and just to bring folks back that like I said, most SD-WAN providers are looking at sort of the amount of encrypted throughput bandwidth. That's your primary
Yeah,
sort of how does your pricing model differ specifically? You mentioned, I think, before that it's available publicly on your
yeah.
site and you can just sign up for it. But what is the model itself, if not that traditional kind of encrypted throughput amount plus features and
Yeah.
install?
So before we came out with our pricing, we just did a survey. We reached out. At that time, we had approximately 10,000 people in our database. Today, it's close to 7,000. And
Hmm.
we reached out to them. That was very end of 2019. And we asked them various questions. We didn't come with suggested pricing and ask them, do you think this is good or not? But we actually asked them, what do you think should be the pricing for various levels of quantities of edge devices? And what should be the business model? And
Hmm.
and also what do you see as a problem with the existing models? because many of them are using
Right.
SD-WAN from various vendors. One of the
It's a
biggest complaints,
data-driven model. I love that, right? So you're here, yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
one of the biggest complaints that repeated itself was we actually find it hard to understand what we are paying for and to understand the bill that we're getting from our
Mm,
existing SD-WAN vendor. So we need something that will be simple. And the other thing
mm-hmm.
was a complaint about the bandwidth based, because it relates to the first comment. Because when you have it bandwidth based, many times you get a surprise. And the last thing that an enterprise wants is to have a
Yeah,
surprise in their bill. So we
right.
decided to do something that would be very, very straightforward, simple to understand and to predict. It's simply based on the number of edge devices you have concurrently in the system, in our management system,
Okay.
in a
Mm-hmm.
single month. So if you had during 1 month
Oh, wow.
maximum number of, I don't know, 20
Mm-hmm.
devices, you're paying based on the 20 devices, and it's a tiered model that we have. So the price for the last instance of the edge device, of course, goes down as the quantity increases. And we also have a model for our partners, for the service providers who are launching services. They have, their discounts and everything. That's not something that we close that in contracts with our partners, of course.
Mm-hmm. That just gets me thinking. As a quick aside, another thing we've been talking a lot with WAN managers over the past few months, obviously, is the idea that kind of remote work is here to stay. So that might sort of metastasize the number of devices. Is that something you guys have been thinking about? So my point being here that we've talked to a lot of WAN managers that knowing that remote workers are here to stay are thinking about onboarding sort of small SD-WAN like devices and sending them to their employees. I just wonder how that might look in your model, and if such a thing might be facilitated by it.
Yeah. So there are some things that we're doing right now in the space of, let's say, call it remote workers. I'm not saying that we're doing exactly what you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
One of the issues of those devices that you send to employees is that it's not so scalable because of the cost of the hardware.
Right.
Um, and
That's
also,
exactly the problem they're looking at. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
that's one part of it, and the other part is that you need to pay for more than one connection if you actually want to have redundancy. I actually have that
Exactly.
at home,
They
but
yeah.
no,
Yeah.
not everybody wants to do that and to pay for two
Mm-hmm.
connections,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
wired and a wireless or something like that. Um, but there are some things that we're doing with regards to remote workers. We do see increased interest in general in our solution during these days of tendency to work from home, let's call it.
Yeah. Certainly, I've talked to, like I said, several WAN managers that even if it's just for the more management C-level kind of folks, they have even done some centralized provisioning of an additional line so that they can have active connections for the folks that are really mission critical. So it's just some worth thinking about that's out there, and seems like I think would fit pretty well with this model.
Yeah.
All right, so Amir, we've been talking now for a while, but before we wrap up, I just wanted to say, we're talking here in quarter four of 2020. This is going to come out early in the start of the year. Just what are your plans for 2021? How do you see things as I called you before, a serial entrepreneur, startup facilitator? How do you see things developing through the next year with flexiWAN?
So we see flexiWAN at, let's call it, an inflection point. We see 2021 as an inflection point year, that we have a very big database of users or customers on our system who are
Mm-hmm.
POCing, some of them actually in deployment. We have actual customers who are working today in deployment, but we have many POCs going on, and we think that the coming few months, beginning of 2021, we're going to see a lot of those POCs moving into production with all the conversations we're having with customers. We're seeing the platform being expanded in the application direction, enabling an easier way to load those applications into the system. And by that, really expand the capabilities of the system, which can dynamically be added to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we're certainly looking forward to seeing that develop, albeit with some trepidation of our research models and some of our friends in the TEM industry. Right. So we started this podcast really as a reaction to not being able to meet with folks at conferences and interact in the ways that we've been accustomed to. So we thought we would go with digital content. But what I want to know is, what do you miss most about the pre-pandemic world or post-vaccination and all that sort of thing? What are you most excited to get back to doing in your life?
Well, there's a difference between the business life and the personal life. On the business life, yeah,
Yeah, of
I
course.
am
Yeah.
I am looking for more of the personal touch, of various events in the market, being able to actually meet people in this industry who actually became friends.
Yeah,
On the
absolutely.
personal life, more less closures and sending the
Yeah.
kids back to school. That can be a great thing.
Oh, I have three elementary school age children who have been almost entirely at home for the last 8 months. So believe me, yes,
Yeah. So, well, my,
absolutely.
my smaller son is seventh grade, and he said, from his perspective, he said, "I'm good with finishing the year this way." He's enjoying it.
Well, sleeping in isn't so bad. I'll
Yeah.
give it that for sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Excellent. Well, Amir, it was a real pleasure. Thanks so much for taking the time. And there's definitely something I think everybody listening worth looking into and understanding better here. So we appreciate the work you've done and explaining it to us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present this in this podcast. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for listening. The WAN Manager podcast is brought to you by TeleGeography, a division of Primetrica Incorporated, and is edited and produced by Jane Miller. I wrote the theme song you're listening to right now, and we get administrative canine support from my dog Honeybun, who you might hear chiming in from time to time when the mood strikes her. If you want to learn more about our data, head over to telegeography.com, where you can find our blog that covers many of the topics we hit here, and you can sign up for our WAN Manager newsletter. Until next time, have a great day.